Hey guys, welcome back to the SKYMASTER F18 build series. Hopefully you've enjoyed it so far. If you have, or this is your first time here, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. It helps support the channel. You can also hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't done so already. That too supports the channel. And if you have any questions or comments, don't forget to list them down below. You can also shoot me an email as well too. My email is listed in the comments. So without further ado, guys, let's hop into this build. What we're going to work on now is we're going to work on the elevator servos. It's going to be a fairly, I think, in-depth process. It's a unique system that SKYMASTER has on this this elevator setup. There's no linkages involved. It's a direct connection to the elevators. What we'll do is we'll hop into the video and let's get going. All right, guys, so this portion of the manual definitely has some issues, and I'll cover those with you. Now, the first step here is, or the first thing to point out is this, they say right in the manual that the mount's designed for 8911 servos. So we are using the JR D-Force Aviation 8911 servos for the elevator. So that's perfect. Now, the servo horns, the new JR servo horns don't work for the elevators. Now, the reason they don't work for the elevators is when, if you can imagine that my pen is the skin of the airframe, when the servo horn's sitting in there, this needs to be as close as possible to the skin, like that. Now, if we use the new JR servo horns, they would sit out a lot further, and the actual elevator itself basically would sit. Try and show you here as an example. So the actual elevator itself would sit way too far away from the skin when you have this servo horn, which is actually the one shown in the manual. The elevator is going to sit much closer to the skin like that, which is correct. So we do have to use these servo horns. Fortunately, I had these. We didn't have to order them, and that works out great. Now, the other issue is that in the manual, it clearly states the bearing is, so make up an elevator servo horn, one pair symmetrical. You can see the picture there in photo number 32. Bearing is 55 millimeters from the center of the screw to the shaft. Now that is completely incorrect. I'm assuming they're meaning to say 25 millimeters. So if we do 55 millimeters, that's close enough. Oh, 55.01, that's pretty close. So this servo horn definitely isn't long enough, which is a problem. So if we go to 25, which is what I'm assuming they meant to put in the manual, that brings us in line with that, that hole right there. So keep that in mind. So I'll mark that guy just so we know which one. And we're marking that just so we can get things lined up when we line things up and make sure that that is the right one. So anyways, that's a bit of a note there for you, but interesting. All right, guys, so the whole elevator package, and I guess the bearing package. Now these, when you open it up, this bearing package also has the bearings and stuff for the leading edge flaps. So that's why there's different hardware here. So you just need to keep in mind that the shorter hardware with the button head screw or button head is for the leading edge flaps. The ones with the angular contact surface is for the elevator. Now when you screw these into the horns, this is not spaced out enough. So what we need to do is we need to actually sand out or machine out the back side of that elevator or servo horn. And the reason for that is we need this bolt to sit more flush in there. So if you look at it here, we need that servo horn to sit as close as possible to the fuselage, and that's spaced out too much. So we need to work on that, and I'll figure that out. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the step drill in my drill press and just do just a light feathering there just to get a bit of angle so we can get that head buried in the servo horn as much as possible. So I'll do that and I'll show you guys the final result. Alright guys, so there's the final result. I think I'm happy with it. I don't really want to make that angle any deeper, otherwise there's not much material left. So hopefully that works and we don't have to make it any larger, but we'll go with that, see how it works out. And if it's good, then we'll do the other servo horn the same. But, you know, we're not relying on the threads here to hold anything because we've got 3 bearings that are going on. And then there's a nylon nut that goes on as well, too. So there's, you know, this is just the support for everything that gets squished together. So anyways, we're going to put that together. I'm probably not going to use any Loctite yet. I'm just going to wait and make sure that that works. Next thing we're going to have to do is work on getting this servo positioned properly. Now, if we position that servo all the way down, we are too far down. It might work okay if the rubber pieces are put on there and the little brass things, but generally on jets where there's no vibration, we don't put the pieces on. So I'm going to have to get that spaced out. And that'll be quite a big step to work on there. Now, if we do get that tucked nice and close, that's kind of where we're at. So what I'm going to do initially here is I'm going to grab the elevator, install it, click it into place, and make sure we've got enough space there. So I'll do that and I'll show you guys the result. All right, guys, so nothing's fastened right now. Obviously, the elevator is clipped into place. So that shows you our kind of gap that we have there. Now, I think that's going to work out good. Now, we're going to cut that servo horn, obviously, so it's not going to be any longer than it needs to be. All right, so I'm pretty sure this is all going to work out good. I still haven't Loctited the bolt going through there, but I did cut the servo horn, and now I'm going to install the servo horn and install it onto the servo. Now, obviously, we're going to be using the pinch bolts, Loctite, super important. Now she is nice and tight. So the reason I'm doing this now is when I put this into the airframe to get things lined up, I can't have the servo horn wiggling all over the place. Okay, so now we can start worrying about the spacing in between the servo and the airframe. Now I think that I found the measurement, but I'm going to play around with that some more and I will let you guys know. Okay guys, so this will be attempt number 1. Now, what I was thinking about using was a couple of these extra servo mounts, but I think I need 5mm and this wasn't enough. So these nuts actually worked out perfect, and hopefully you can see the difference there. They're just a little bit thicker, well, almost double actually. So what I did was I just put some CA, some medium CA, put the nuts on, used some kicker, and now we've got our spacers. Now I'm just hoping that this actually is the right amount of space, but it's a nice, simple, strong, solid solution. So we'll put that in the airframe and try it out. All right, so with the servo bottomed out now, I tried to put the elevator on and it's sticking out too far. So I've got my 1.5mm Allen key here, and the size doesn't really matter, but this kind of gives us the amount of space we need to get rid of. So this Allen key just fits in there, and there's just a hair of room. So basically we need those bolts or whatever spacer we're going to use to be a little bit thinner, or yeah, roughly the same size as this is what we need to take off the bolts. And that's 2mm is the size. So we need to take about 1.75mm off those bolts, if that's what we're going to use, and that'll be the right size. Okay guys, so the actual thickness that we need is 4.19mm for spacers. Now these bolts are 5.96. If we did sand them down, we could do that, and we would get 4.19, which is where we kind of want to end up. So that's an option. We could sand those down. Other option I have is I've got this piece of carbon, which is basically 2 millimeters, call it, thick. So if I made little spacers out of the carbon and added 2 layers, that would work out perfect. So I'm going to probably make the spacers out of the carbon, and I will show you guys the final result, of course. Alright guys, so the spacers are done out of carbon here. And I think they're going to work. So the actual thickness of them is like 4.1 millimeters. So hopefully that works out good, but that's what the 2 layers looks like. And so I'm going to CA these things onto the servo again, and then we'll put this servo in and see what it looks like. All right, guys, I had to do a bunch of sanding on the carbon pieces there, so you might be able to see this. So there's a full thickness carbon piece there, and there's a partial one right there. So the total dimensions, now this may not work out to be the same on yours or even the other elevator here. So the total dimensions is 6 millimeters, is what I was going for. If I take these 2 pieces of carbon, put it on there, should be closer to 7, yeah, 6.8. So basically we needed to sand about 1 millimeter off one of those spacers. That was fairly easy, just use some determination and a file. So anyways, that's done. I think the spacing works out perfect. I did drill out a little bit more on the back side of the servo arm, and we're very, very close there. The back of this bolt was rubbing on the airframe. You can see right there. Now that's pretty typical on these F-18s, all the ones that I've seen anyways, but we want to try and eliminate that as much as possible. So with that just a touch in further, that bolt should be able to run freely. I did use red Loctite on the back side of the bolt. I don't want that to come out. And this is a nylon lock nut, so we're good there. Now, if you pay close attention here, it's really hard to see this in the manual. I don't even think it's visible. But there's washers that come in this little kit with all the pieces. So you want to install those washers in between each of the bearings. That makes sure there's no interference with the bearings rubbing against each other. But I just thought I'd point that out because it's a very important step. So I think this is all ready to go. Now I did take the end bolt out, and the reason for that is the Allen bolt that I had in there actually protruded from the servo arm itself, which rubbed on the ailerons or the elevator surface. So what we need to do is we need to use one of the screws which sit more flush. And I did forget about the cover plate for the elevator servo. So we will need to get this servo arm off again as well anyways. So I'm not going to worry about Loctiting this into place. But I'll show you guys here that Phillips head is what we're after because it sits flush or just barely protruding from the servo arm. So that is kind of our finished product. Now I'm going to get this hooked up in the left aileron or left elevator and see how it works out. Alright guys, so just with the servo sitting in there and my hand pulling it backwards, hopefully you can see that gap there. There's just a slight gap in between the airframe, the fuselage, and the servo arm. Now if I do push it flat, that's going to give you a better view of what it is. But you could probably fit a couple pieces of paper in there, and we'd have just a slight gap. So that's what we're looking for, as close as we can possibly get it. Now I'll put the elevator in and we'll see how that looks. Okay guys, so everything's just temporarily put into place. The servo is not fixed yet, but it's just set in place. Now I did put the receiver portion into the elevator, and this is just held in with 2 screws. It's already pre-drilled, it's already lined up and everything, so that portion's done. But I'm going to affix this better into the elevator section, and I'll show you that later. But right now it's temporarily fastened in, just for reference. Okay, the servo's not screwed down or anything, but I'll just show you guys what's going on here. Everything is plugged into the receiver, and I'll just go through the motions here for you. So I'm quite happy with the way everything turned out. The spacing and everything looks good. We're not rubbing on the fuselage. That might change a little bit when we screw the servo down, but happy with that. So what I'm going to do as the next step is I'm going to pull this elevator off, screw the servo in place, and then we'll put the elevator back on, make sure everything's good. If everything's good, then we're going to work on putting the cover plate on and then affixing that receiver portion into the elevator. All right, guys, everything is hooked up, and I'm very, very happy with the way everything works. So we're nice and tight with a surface this big and that type of contact. A little bit of play can be expected. I think that play is in the, well, it's just everywhere in the system. I think it's in between the bearings and then the receiver. Yeah, everything works good. That's aileron, left aileron, right aileron, elevator. So there's a little bit of rubbing on the fuselage. You can see the bolt has rubbed the finish off a little bit. So I don't think I want to space that servo out anymore. And the reason for that is when we do forward elevator, it's just clearing the servo horn in there. So I don't really want to do anything else with the alignment, because if we bring the servo out further, it's going to be rubbing on the bottom portion of the elevator right there in that position when I do forward elevator. So I might do a little bit of sanding on the head of that the screw or the bolt on the back side of that servo arm, because we do have to take the servo arm off to do the cover. But the next thing we'll do is the cover plate, and we'll get that all sorted out. All right, guys, so marking the servo output. So this servo horn is the same diameter as the outline on the servo itself. Okay, so what we're doing is we're just following. What we're doing is just following the servo. So get this cover plate lined up, mark the edges. Get the cover plate lined up, mark the edges. Receiving portion of the airframe is definitely not molded very accurately. And this is a flat piece of G10 or fiberglass. And there's quite a curve to this thing. So what I'm probably going to try to do is heat this piece up and see if we can bend it so it's got a nice angle to it. And then we'll actually have to see if this interferes with anything, just because of the thickness of it. We may have to sand this out a little bit, but we will play with this and see what happens. I guess step number one is see if I can bend this thing. All right, guys, so I just heated this up with my my heat gun. Just laid it down like this. Heated it up till I thought it was correct, and then just picked it up, put it against the edge of the counter. I needed to use a towel because it was really hot, and then just hold it there and wait for it to cool off. And now it's got a natural bend to it, which actually lines up quite well. All right, guys, just ended up using my step drill bit, and there's the result. Turned out really well. And that's the final product. So really, really nicely centered. Now this is going to be a bit of a pain because when you put this servo horn on, you want to be able to get those pinch bolts done up. So I think we're going to have this sitting at basically loose at a funny angle, get the servo horn all installed, pinch bolts, main servo bolt, and then we'll be able to install the cover plate. So it's going to take a little bit of work, but we'll get that figured out. All right, guys, extremely happy with the way this all worked out. The spacing is perfect. with me sanding the back of that bolt that's on the back of the servo horn. There's a nice little gap there. It's going to be hard to see. Hopefully that helps pick it up there. So nice spacing on everything. Everything's running nice and freely. Right now it's hooked up to a LiPo that's down at about 7.7 volts and working phenomenally. So that's all good. I'm just going to drill some holes, put some screws in there, and the elevator is, this one elevator is almost done. All right, guys, so the last step for the elevator is the receiver portion, which plugs into the servo bearings, the servo arm bearings. So if you look in the manual, photo number 33 there, it shows, and it actually talks about cutting out this entire area, cutting a slot for this piece, and talks about all that stuff and having to glue it in place because it's going to be, you don't want to go too oversized. So anyways, I think this is probably a revision on SKYMASTER's point, but they've already cut the slots and everything for this receiver piece. So when you actually insert it in there, it's a nice snug fit, and there's zero play in either direction. There's just a little bit side to side, and I guess a couple millimeters, maybe a millimeter up and down. Now I've already screwed these screws in, so pulled them out. So we've got threads in the holes, and so we're going to put lots of CA in those threads and everything to get that glued in place. But it's a fairly simple process on these newer kits. On the older kits, it was probably a bigger process. In the manual too, it also shows you cutting the skin or the surface out in this whole area. Not necessary. I did enlarge this a little bit for the servo arm and made a nice angle there, but that's all I had to do. I didn't have to cut, the whole area open, as long as you get your spacing done correctly. So I'm going to glue that in place as a final step for these elevators. All right, guys, so as a final step here, we'll make sure that we can easily plug this elevator in and make sure we're all good. So receiver's on, radio's on. So the process for this, obviously the elevator is going to be centered. We can take our tape off, which was just marking our output shaft. Okay, now on the underside, there's that button to push for the piece of fiberglass that clips this into place. Now, when you're getting this ready to fly, you'll need like an Allen key to poke it. But what you can do while you're building this is reach in and just slide that fiberglass piece up. So we just slide the elevator on. There you go. Clicks into place, nice and solid. There's like almost zero play there, so that's beauty. And we are good to go. So now this mixing, I've already got the mixing in there, and that mixing is actually from the previous aircraft. We do have, now I did have to reverse this servo. We do have up elevator, forward elevator, right aileron, and left aileron. So anyways, that's already programmed in there, that little bit of movement. Anyways, guys, that is the elevators. All right, guys, so that is the end of this elevator video. Now, I've only completed one side. I'm going to complete the other side, but of course it just mirrors what this side is, and it's exactly the same setup. So if I do run into any issues on the other side, I'll let you guys know in one of the other videos, but that's basically the elevator setup. We're going to have to still do our centering and everything, but we're probably pretty darn close because the servo and everything's centered, so I'm sure we're close. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you do have any questions or comments, make sure you list them down below, and you can also reach out to me via email as well too. My email is in the comments. If you like the content, you want to support the channel, the best thing you can do, if you haven't done so, is hit that subscribe button down below. When you do hit that subscribe button, don't forget to hit the bell so you get notified when I release new videos. And also smash that like button, give the video a thumbs up. So thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you in the next build video for the SKYMASTER F-18 aircraft.